Okay, so I'm Sally Thorne, and I'm here today to talk about, this is my presentation for today. I'm going to be talking about diversity in the curriculum, and I've called my talk Illuminating the Whole Picture, and I think it should hopefully tie in really nicely with what Alex was talking about earlier, with the kind of feminism crossover, and what Chris was talking about earlier with Black Tudors. So it's hopefully going to pick up on some of the themes from today. So I wanted to make a little caveat beforehand, because I was writing this and I thought, you know what, this could get really preachy, and if it starts to get preachy, then please throw stuff at me, but keep it soft, okay, that would be best. It's just that the reason that I've chosen to speak about this is because this is really what I've been working on all year. I was looking at what can I be talking about, what would be the best thing for me to share. Well, this is probably what I know the most about, what I've been thinking the most about, and therefore it seemed to be the best thing for me to share. So, just a bit of background about me. So, I've been teaching for 16 years, and I spent the first 13 of those here, at Matravers School. Matravers School is in Wiltshire. They are currently appointing a head of history. If you're interested in a move to Wiltshire, they are advertising, just to let you know. So, Matravers is the only comprehensive in the town of Westbury, and you can see a representative sample of the students. They're overwhelmingly white. So this is a very modern picture. They have found a non-white person since I left. But it's also quite rural. It's quite a mixed bag in terms of economic background. But as one deputy head teacher referred to it, it is mono-ethnic. And in 13 years, I think I could have counted the number of non-white students that I taught on the fingers of one hand. Okay? Our diversity was instead represented by Polish children and traveller children. So that's who that was kind of what we were thinking about with diversity. Then in 2016, I moved here to Colston's Girls' School. This is the polar opposite. It's urban and it's very diverse. On my first day, I mispronounced more names I'd never come across before than I did in my entire time at Matravers. I spent a lot of time saying sorry. I was replacing a head of department that had been on maternity leave, so there wasn't what you might call a handover. Various other transition issues kind of got in the way, so what I ended up doing was just picking up my curriculum from this school and dropping it into this school, without really thinking about what that meant. And I spent a lot of time recrafting the curriculum at Matravers with the new GCSE in mind, so it seemed like the sensible thing to do, and certainly it got me through that first couple of years. But it quickly became apparent that this wasn't really good enough. Our students are really not backwards in coming forwards. And they make comments at parents' evenings, on their surveys, and they also kind of voted with their feet. So of these 3 students, I taught all of these 3 students in my first year when they were in year 9. Oh, sorry. And the only one that's currently studying history at GCSE is Ruby. She's my star student. These 2 geographers. So I feel like there was something going wrong here, that I wasn't necessarily making the right choice, but I have an appreciative crowd here. I have to tell you what my GCSE numbers yesterday. We beat geography! Yeah. I knew you'd
Take that, Mrs. Humanities on the live stream. I know you're watching it. Sod you, sorry, Sally. The sod you geographers.
He's just saying what we're all thinking. So, there's kind of a glaring side issue here, with which is the background of my school. So, Colston's Girls' School, it was founded with an endowment from noted slave trader and Bristol philanthropist Colston. Here is his controversial statue that exists in the middle of town. Okay, so I really, having done a bit of reading about it, find it a bit delicious that his money was used to found probably the most liberal school in Bristol for girls of very diverse backgrounds, when his will stipulated that it was conservative education for Anglican boys. But that's generally overlooked. Nobody really talks about that. The other thing that's often overlooked is that this statue was erected about 170 years after he died. So it's not necessarily a historical statue anyway. It's just who the Victorians write. So this is a kind of still that I took from a debate. The Colston debate rages really heartily in Bristol, and every year we troop down to Bristol Cathedral on a date close to Colston's birthday to fulfil the stipulations of our endowment. We celebrate him every year. We have protesters outside the cathedral. We have to have police at the cathedral to kind of keep the peace, which is kind of unpleasant. Our students are approached on the street by people who want to ask them about the Colston name and what they think of it. And I'm not going to go into my opinion on the appropriateness of grown adults approaching teenage girls on the street about something they haven't really got control over. But the learning point for me as head of history was that it was really important that I empowered my students through their curriculum to be able to deal with that if they came across it. Has anybody read this book? Did you all love it? This is a personal game changer for me, so you can't really see it. This bit says to white people. I don't know whether you can see that. So why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. I read this last Easter and really reeled me in. The first chapter is all about history, so it's a real easy, really grabbed me right away. And it sets out a really good case for improving our curriculum offering, not just in schools that are diverse, but in all schools. And it left me really humbled actually after I read it. And what I did, I went back to work and I immediately started teaching a series of lessons about Windrush, which proved really timely. So I borrowed those lessons off Dan Lyndon Cohen, but I quite quickly realised that I just didn't really know enough. I didn't really know enough about the topics that I wanted to teach. And that it was really, really important that I put this into the curriculum and that I made the curriculum broader. So, why? Why is that so important? Well, as I said, when I came from Matravers, we didn't have a great deal of diversity within our curriculum, and we didn't really think that was important. These aren't the students that we're teaching. We're not teaching black students, Asian students. They're not in our population. So why do those stories need to be there? So I've got three backgrounds to this, three suggestions for this. So the first is this idea of citizen historians. So you may have heard, if you follow me on Twitter, or if you follow Rich Kennick and Radical, you may have heard of the Bristol Pizza Group. We meet, we eat pizza, we talk about history, that's pretty much it. And the first year we were talking about assessment and where we wanted our students to be by the end of year 9. And somebody, I can't remember which person, came up with this idea of citizen historians, that by the time students finish at the end of year 9, you want them to be able to understand the world that they're living in, to be able to go out to be good citizens of the UK, good British citizens. And that's kind of part of what history is about, making sure that you're creating people that have enough knowledge of the world that they're living in and the background of it to make sure that they can be good citizens. I also think it's really important with kind of understanding the world that we're living in for the students, particularly, we've got, there are lots more discussions around migration at the moment going on. You've got the Windrush stuff. I've got a lot of students asking me questions about that. Why are these people coming, why are they coming over here? Why are they being sent back? What's happening? What are the wider stories about this? Well, if I had that in my curriculum, I could just get on with teaching as opposed to answering their questions. And I think what it comes down to really is this illuminating the whole picture. So it's no good saying that the history of Britain is white. That's not true. And if you follow Mark Stuckbury on Twitter, you might, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, you might a couple of years ago have come across him arguing with somebody about a BBC video that had non-white people in their clip about Roman Britain. And that was a feisty debate. And it got picked up by the national press, and Mary Beard got involved, and there was a lot of arguing about it. And it kind of chimed in with what I was thinking about, because that is the whole picture of Roman Britain. You can't say Roman Britain was only white faces. That's not the whole picture. You're just shining a light on the white faces if you're only teaching about the white faces. And you need to shine a light on the whole of it. And that's what I'm thinking about with my curriculum. So I wrote this bit down because I thought it was really important. So what I've realised is that my Asian, my African, my Caribbean students, they're going to have some discussion about their own history at home. Their parents are going to have a bit of knowledge. They're going to bring that to them, okay? And I get a lot of projects from my students on the Somali Civil War, on partition, on things that their families have been involved in. And So they have some knowledge of that, and they're already aware of the bias that is in the history that they're experiencing. They already know about it. It's the white students that don't know about it because it's not apparent to them, and there's no guarantee that they're ever going to be able to access the full narrative, ever going to illuminate the whole picture, if we're not providing it for them at school. So, by the time I got to term 6 last year, I replanned my Key Stage 3 with my colleague Nick, and I had some really quite strong feelings. In fact, I had some red lines. I had some red lines about my curriculum that I didn't really want to cross. So I'm going to talk you through the process that I've been through on the past year. Or should I not have said red lines? I can see them. So these are my red lines. So first of all, we need to teach transatlantic slavery better, particularly if we're going to have this as part of our diverse curriculum. I don't really think of transatlantic slavery as black history. It's more a history of what white people have done to black people. But if you're going to count that as diversity, that's fine, but it needs to be done better. And I think the numerous newspaper articles about really quite dodgy worksheets that people have been using that have then hit the press, there was a story in the press last year about a slave auction that took place at a great time that got out of hand, that led to expulsions. So I think we need to think about doing that better. I think we need to tackle tokenism by weaving the stories of minorities into what we're doing, into the existing units that we're doing, rather than just dropping in units and saying, tick, we've done that. It's not that old Key Stage 3, yet tick, diversity, done that. Let's try and get it in everywhere. Let's try and show the whole picture. And something else for me was that the diversity of our school population should be represented in the history curriculum in every year group as far as possible. And you were talking earlier, Alex, about making sure that in GCSE that you're offering something that will speak to everybody. And I think, yeah, so I've tried to cover that too. So, transatlantic slavery then. I'm really excited to have been accepted onto the Historical Association Fellowship, Teacher Fellowship for this. So next month, it might all change, because this is what I've been working on, but who knows what's going to come out of it next. So this is what we do at the moment. So I begin it in Year 7. We teach a short unit on transatlantic slavery with Year 7, right at the end of the year, where we think about how should we teach about the slave trade. So it's quite a basic, here are some facts about the slave trade, here are some facts about slavery, and that's kind of how we start it. In Year 8, we move on to look at the abolition of slavery as part of a similarity and difference study on 18th and 19th century protests. So we put that in with the French Revolution, and we put it in with Peterloo and the Chartist movement to look at how people were protesting for their rights and the rights of other people in that time period, and how their methods changed or differed from each other. And then in Year 9 we think about how the slave trade was still affecting Britain in the 20th century. So sorry. I was saying at the beginning of this that every time I stand up to do one of these things, I think I'm going to become somebody's bad inset story. I'm about to become somebody's bad inset story, so I'm sorry that I'm slow. I think I freaked myself out. So, the idea really with Year 7 is, what I try to do there is to kind of bring it back to the basics of the trade and bring some individuals in there, some stories. So we look at Fanny Coker, who was a local servant, and I use the term in inverted commas, and a plantation owning family called the Pinneys. And the Pinneys lived in the Georgian House, which is a house that you can go and visit in Bristol. And her mother was transported from an area that is modern Nigeria to Nevis when she was 12. And their story, and that of Fanny's grandmother, was the subject of a project known as Daughters of Igbo Women, which you can find on the internet. It's kind of an art project where they look at the grandmother, the mother and the daughter, and created films and artwork around their stories. And I think the stories of individuals is really important to make it clear that this story involves people. You know, slavery is not just a thing; it is something that there are people at the bottom of that. And the scale, otherwise the scale is so vast that I think sometimes it becomes a bit meaningless. So it can be difficult to track down stories of individual slaves in the Caribbean. You know, the records of those people aren't great. So I was really lucky that I was contacted by Ros Martin, who here is named here. It was one of the artists on the project, and she wanted to come to do a workshop with our students surrounding the project. Actually, she knew the school because she was one of our anti-Colston protesters, but she came into the school and did this workshop with them, and it's formed now part of our curriculum. So the Year 7 scheme of work aims at these students creating a resource to teach about transatlantic slavery to younger students. We've got a kind of adjoining primary school, and I have a lofty aim of sharing this with that primary school, but I haven't quite managed it yet. As I said, this is this year's work. So the next visit to the topic of slavery comes partway through Year 8. I told Will at the Hodder stand that I would put his, this is my favourite textbook, Peace and War. When we're comparing it, we compare with the French Revolution and British political protests. It's brand new for Year 8 this year, and sadly I don't teach Year 8, it's too much A-level on my timetable. So my colleagues report back on it really favourably, say it's gone really nicely, so I think this is a really nice way of kind of putting that into your curriculum. So previously it sat within a unit on change and continuity in industrial Britain, so if you teach industrial Britain, Victorian times, change and continuity, anything like that, you could put abolition in there. So I teach it as a simple 4-lesson unit, and it's mostly, as I said, based on spreads from peace and war. So it considers the impact of wealthy white abolitionists, such as Wilberforce, lower class white people signing petitions, black abolitionists, such as Olaudah Equiano, and the impact of slave revolts, and the economic drivers here of abolition. And once we work through this, I ask the students to make up their mind about the most important factor. We use a little diagram like this. Anybody ever use a diagram like this? So just getting them to think about where they think it is most important. So the closer to the centre, the less important the factor is, and the further out, the more important the factor is. And this helps them to think hard about what they think, about what their opinion is before they get started on the kind of final piece. So once they've done this, I introduce them to a couple of historians that have much more, a lot to say about abolition. And this is the interpretations that I give them. Just give you a moment to look. So on the left, we've got Douglas Coupland. Douglas Coupland was a professor of colonial history in Oxford. His office was in Rhodes House, sponsored by Cecil Rhodes, which also housed probably the biggest collection of abolitionist pamphlets in the country. So he was born around about the time the British Empire was kind of beginning its swan song, and he concluded that the slave trade was abolished as a result of humanitarian reasons. People began to feel really bad, and therefore it was abolished. On the right here, we've got Eric Williams. Eric Williams was born in Trinidad. He also studied at Oxford, but his experience was not an easy one. He found it really difficult to get sponsorship for his PhD, which he felt was as a result of his race. And when he was eventually successful, he wrote a seminal study of abolition, which laid out the decline in the slave-worked economies of the Caribbean, which was published as Capitalism and Slavery in 1944. Now, I think this is an exceptionally easy way into the concept of interpretations for Year 8 students, because when you put this on the board and you ask them, think about how your life experiences shape the stories historians tell, and when you put them side by side like this, there isn't a kid that gets this wrong, in my experience. They get it immediately. You know, well, obviously, this guy, you know, he's gonna want to say nice things about the country where he was born in. This guy, maybe, you know, he had some bad experiences in Britain, so maybe he's not going to want to think about it in such a rosy way. And you can, I found that this was not difficult to find. This was not hard. So I found this article, which was written kind of from a local perspective about the two of them. And this is where I got that information. And so it's quite helpful, this, because it also gives you a bit of insight into the different sources that they use. So, you know, for GCSE, thinking about how historians' interpretations are informed by different sources, this is quite a nice way into doing that as well. So it's a useful thing. So the third part of this topic comes in Year 9, and we look at the Windrush migration to Britain and consider the long-term impacts of Britain's slave trade in creating black citizens of the empire that felt that Britain was their mother country. And I've got to be honest, it's the bit that I am least happy with at the moment. I'm a department really of one. I've got 2 members of SLT in the Senko, and they're my department. So generally, that's me. I'm generally doing all of it. So yeah, this is the last bit of it is it's under construction, if you like. So there is a lot more that could be done with it, and this week I've really been thinking hard about my opener lesson to my post-World War II unit. So we used to just start with the Cold War and look at the reasons why the Cold War started, but what I do now, what I did this week, was I added in overviews of decolonisation and the formation of the United Nations. So I think this is going to give students a much stronger foundation on which to build for their Cold War studies. So I think the Vietnam War is going to make a lot more sense when you've already talked to them about decolonisation and you've talked to them about the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. And I'm a bit inspired here to think about, well, how did World War II change the world? And maybe that's what I need to do. I was teaching the Cold War last year, and I love it. I love the Cold War. It's really interesting. But I cut some of those lessons out so I could put Windrush in. And I think maybe Windrush is as relevant to their understanding of the world today, if not more so, than the Cold War now, possibly. Oh, people really are going to start throwing things. Okay, I love the Cold War, honestly. Okay, and actually I was thinking about this on Twitter this week, and Ben said, I think the group now for history teachers is clearly an obsession, because this is really something that now I can't stop thinking about. But I will stop talking about that bit now. How am I doing? Oh, apparently my Asda order is out for delivery. Okay, so that's my look at transatlantic slave trade. The other thing that I was talking about was making sure that we kind of put it in everywhere, that we weave it carefully through everything that we do. I'm really worried about my curriculum looking tokenistic when it comes to diversity. I don't want students to feel like I'm trying to tick the box. Like I said, I want them to just think, oh, this is the full picture. This is what British history is. Rather than just shining a flashlight into a corner and then going back to the same old mural that everybody's familiar with. So this is what I've done with it. And I found thinking about the different second order concepts that are available to us are really helpful here. So I think that at Key Stage 3 everybody focuses really hard on depth studies and they focus on causation, and that's kind of what people are thinking about. So I've really tried to diversify my units. I found that quite helpful, hopefully for GCSE as well. Thinking about change and continuity, similarity and difference, consequence, significance. If you buy my book, there's some stuff in there about it. So there's space for everything in there. So in Year 7, I shortened Ye Olde Medieval Realms unit by 3 lessons, and I added in 3 lessons on the medieval Islamic empires. And my PGCE student at the moment, Sonia, she's planned those lessons and the assessment on that for me this year. She's really loved it, really enjoyed doing it, and it's a really nice similarity and difference comparison that you can make there. In Year 8, we've got this new developmental study. So I'm referring to it as the history of an idea, which isn't a great title, I admit, but it's essentially a prequel to Medicine Through Time. So if you used to teach Medicine Through Time on the old study and you're sad, you miss prehistoric medicine, Egyptian medicine, Greek medicine, that's really what the history of an idea is. So the history of an idea is, the idea in question is the theory of the 4 humours. So we look at the birth of the theory of the 4 humours with Hippocrates and Galen. So it lets us kind of get our teeth into that before they even start thinking about GCSE. And it also helps us to think about how classical knowledge has been preserved and how it was preserved and protected and critiqued in Islamic centres of learning while the Goths raged across Europe and the church kind of Chinese whispered everything into a narrow shade of what it had originally been. So all the diverse bits from the old medicine course, there's Constantine the African, Ibn Sina, Ibn al-Nafi, so the circulation of the blood, and we put all of that in here just to kind of underpin that Medicine Through Time study for them so that they can really hit the ground running with it at GCSE, and also provides more diversity. So later on in Year 8, I teach a change and continuity study or a thematic study called Development of Democracy. And I'm going to put the Race Relations Act in there for this year, which hasn't been in there before. That's really nice. If you teach about Malcolm X, the Smethwick election of 1964 triggered a visit to England from Malcolm X because he was so concerned about what was going on. So that might also be a nice kind of side story, side way for you to add that in. And then in Year 9, what I've done so far is just to add this into my World War I unit. So my World War I unit at the moment is Why Do People Stand and Fight in World War I? And it focuses on the reasons why people joined up, why they chose to join. And so this was probably the easiest win because I just needed to add a lesson in there about why men from other parts of the empire wanted to join the war, as opposed to just focusing on British men. Okay. So, on top of all of this, we've got a project unit for students in all year groups to encourage them to do research and wider reading. And in Year 7 and 8, we suggest topics for them. But in Year 9, we ask them to speak to the oldest member of their family that they can get hold of. And then they talk to them about their memories, and they research one of those memories, and they bring that back as a presentation. And what comes back is a real mixed bag. It's really exciting to find what the stories are. So I think, as I said, there's a lot in there about the Somali Civil War with my current group. This year, Indira Gandhi, the Suez Crisis, the Polish Home Army, and then at my last school, I had a presentation from someone whose great-granddad was an Auschwitz survivor, which was, humbling to find out after you've taught the Holocaust unit. Great. Okay, so that's kind of, so that's what we're doing at the moment. And thinking about where to go next. So, as Chris said, he's been working on Miranda Kaufman's book, The Black Tudors. I've also been working on that project. So thinking about how I can put in diversity among the Tudors. Our Tudors unit is myth-busting the Tudors. So it is, was Bloody Mary really bloody? Was Henry VIII really a Protestant? It's that kind of unit. Those are the sorts of things we're looking at. So was Tudor Britain really white? It's a good question for us to put in there. And if you didn't watch the Mary Rose documentary on Sunday and you're interested in this topic, I can really recommend going back and watching it. It was really, really interesting. So Chris has already talked about this far more eloquently than I could. Come to the sessions at the Historical Association or SHP. Talk to Chris, buy the book. It's a great book. It's a really good story. There's a really nice, Diego the Circumnavigator is probably my favourite in there. In Year 8, we realised that we need a more robust unit on the British Empire, so the way that we deal with it at the moment is to just kind of touch on it in passing, so we need to do something a bit better with that. So I think what we're going to try to look at is the impacts that the empire had on Britain, as opposed to thinking about the empire overseas, so what impact it has in other countries. It feels a bit paternalistic to look at it like that. What did Britain do? Was it good or bad what they did in India? This is these are kind of the debates that people have. But thinking about how Britain changed as a result of its participation or its leading of the empire, I think is a kind of a better illumination. It should suggest that it shows that the relationship was not one way, that it was a two-way relationship. And in Year 9, so as well as thinking about what I do post-World War II, I'd like to pick up the theme of empire again by looking at the contribution of empire soldiers in World War II. And last week I went to a great lecture. It's by this lady called Hazel Carby, and she's the Professor for African American Studies and American Studies at Yale, and she's got a new book coming out in September called Imperial Intimacies. And it traces her father's experiences growing up in Jamaica, joining the RAF, and subsequently settling in Britain with a Welsh wife and raising 2 children. So Professor Carby talked at length about the hardships faced in Jamaica when merchant shipping was interrupted by World War II. And it led to a huge spike in the crime rate and abject poverty. So her father joined the RAF as a way out of this. The RAF went recruiting in Jamaica, joined the RAF as a way out, fought all the way through World War II, and then moved to Wales. Now, when Carby was asked by her teacher at school what her father did, and she replied that he was an RAF airman who'd fought for Britain in World War II, her teacher replied that she was a liar, because only white people fought in World War II. So, it wasn't good to hear that. But I think it's that Britain stood alone, that Britain stood alone narrative is really tenacious. That like, plucky little Britain stuck out on its own in World War II. What was it going to do? Well, it did have this absolutely enormous empire behind it that people tend to not really remember. So what are we doing? We're shining a light on plucky little Britain alone, and we're not illuminating this whole picture back here, all these people that are fighting too. So, it's a bit more difficult at GCSE. So I think the best route is to choose a board with a migration thematic study and diverse offerings in the depth and period blocks, but it's not always possible, and GCSE, you know, it has to be driven by a whole range of things. There are lots and lots of things that are kind of forcing people into it. And so these are the units we do. I know everybody loves American West or Cold War on paper 2, but I'd really like to put in a word for Spain in the New World. It's really good. So it's kind of this epic tale of empire building by Spain, encompassing some really amazing stories. Lends itself really nicely to period study. But you know, I don't want to incite a lynch mob here, so I know nobody wants to change their GCSE right now. I think what we do instead is to just try and think about how we can contextualise our GCSE with some smart planning at Key Stage 3, so that hopefully students will just naturally bring that in when we're having class discussions. So when Year 7, they look at the Elizabethan origins of the slave trade with John Hawkins, Drake and Black Tudor. So Diego the circumnavigator joined Drake, helped him, you know, worry the Spanish and steal their silver, and then circumnavigated the world with him. So that's a really nice story. And obviously the Year 8 unit helps to provide wider world context of medicine. A-level's probably what I've changed the least. You know, I am just one woman. But we do offer, what I did change immediately was to offer a different NEA. So we used to, when I joined, the NEA unit was on the Holocaust. So instead we now offer 17th century witchcraft or transatlantic slavery. So I offer one topic and my colleague offers the other. Last year I had 3 people doing slavery and she got 9 for witchcraft. She really felt that was a win. She had to mark more essays than me. But this year I've got 10 doing transatlantic slavery and she's got 3 doing witchcraft. So I feel like it's going in the right way. But going forward, what I'm going to do next year for Year 13 is to offer them a free choice for their NEA. Because, although I want them to look at slavery, I'd like them to look at that. That's kind of what I'm interested in. Really, I think it needs to be something that is relevant to them and something that interests them about their family. And so I feel quite strongly about that. That hopefully this will build as I see students move through the school. The projects that they've been doing in Year 9, they're kind of family history projects. Hopefully that's going to be picked up when they all do A-level history, and then they can all do some further research. So the last thing I had to say is just some ideas for interleaving diversity into your curriculum topics. There's only a few things on the list. So I also thought about World War II and the home front, having heard Professor Carby last week speak about the experiences of Empire citizens in Jamaica. So thinking about, you know, if you're looking at home front, are you just looking at home front in this country, or are you looking at other parts of the empire as well? Victorian London, if you're still a kind of Whitehall, Jack the Ripper, you like those sorts of units at Key Stage 3. Jewish migration to the East End is a really big part of that story and a really, really nice way of getting that in. Really underpins Holocaust study as well. And the last one I've already said. So if you cover Malcolm X, what about adding a lesson about his visit to Smethick during the 1964 election? Is anybody familiar with the 1964 election? So it was a very famous Conservative Party slogan that was daubed on the walls, which was, and I quote, "If you want a nigger for a neighbour, vote Labour." And that was the election of 1964, at which the Conservative MP was elected, and what prompted Malcolm X to come over. So that's just what I've been doing. Those are some ideas. Come and talk to me about it. Ask me on Twitter. Tell me what you're doing. I think it's really exciting. And that's it for me.